She was a mother who often shared messages online about the power of love and the beauty of motherhood, portraying herself as devoted to her 2 children. But now, everyone's left asking what went wrong, as she's accused of a triple homicide, and the evidence she allegedly left behind shattered a quiet neighborhood. On this episode of Criminal Motives, we're covering the case of Jenna Struble. I'm Matthew Pfeiffer, a therapist who analyzes the behavior behind high-profile true crime cases. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. Now, let's get into it.
We're talking about happened in a quiet community south of Chicago. It happened in the middle of the night on Monday as neighbors woke up reportedly to the sounds of gunfire and they called police. When officers responded to the home of the Ford family, the home of Patrick and Stacy, they made a horrifying discovery. Now, one thing we have noticed in the wake of this tragedy is just how many people loved this couple, Patrick and Stacy, and their adult son, Jacob. When you look at Patrick and Stacy's social media, you can see that they had a lot of love for other people as well, especially their grandchildren. The father of those kids was Jake Lambert. One person online said that Patrick was Jake's stepdad and Stacy was his mom. Now, as people are trying to make sense of what happened on this home in a quiet part of Crete Township, Illinois on Norway Trail early Monday morning, many people are trying to comprehend how the mom of the kids who you see in Jake's arms could allegedly be capable of such horror. Now, this is a picture from 2023 from a second birthday, it seems, for one of Jake's kids. And you can see that this looks like a happy family. Everyone color coordinated as they celebrate their toddler. The woman in the picture is Jenna Struble. She's smiling in this picture, but now she's accused of being a cold-blooded killer. Now, this case does not appear to be a whodunit, according to police, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But the why, that is where the mystery is at this point. Now, before we get into more of the dynamics surrounding the relationship potentially at the center of this case, I want to break down the timeline of this crime from law enforcement. So this story takes place in Crete Township, Illinois, which is in Will County, Illinois. It's roughly 45 minutes south of Chicago, right on the Indiana border. This suburb has roughly 25,000 people in it. The Fords lived on what looked like a quiet street, a place where neighbors look after each other. This is an aerial map of the house where this crime allegedly took place, according to police. Now, police say it was here around 2 a.m. on Monday, March 23rd, that they responded for what they're calling a welfare check. Neighbors told local outlets that they heard what sounded like gunfire in the middle of the night, and they called 911. The Will County Sheriff says when they got to the house, they found Jake shot dead in a car outside. There's a picture on social media of a car being towed from the scene that had a tarp over the passenger side window. Police say they found Patrick and Stacy, Jacob's parents, shot dead. They were on the first floor of the house, not far from the front door. Police say they found the family dog just wandering the property. Now, it's unclear what put law enforcement on the trail of the alleged killer, Jenna Struble, but they say they have a big clue now in their possession that could be critical if this case ever goes to trial, and that is the alleged murder weapon, a firearm. Struble also allegedly made the investigation easy for detectives in another way, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Now, police say after Struble shot and killed the father of her children and her children's grandparents, she ran, but she didn't go far. Just about 15 minutes away over the state line to St. John, Indiana. That is where she lives, and that is where she's from. Now, from the very beginning, police said that this did appear to be a targeted incident, a case of alleged domestic violence. And it's unclear what put them on Jenna's trail so quickly right after the murders, but it was within hours. They announced a person of interest was in custody, and then about a day or so later, they announced that Jenna was the person who was going to face charges for what allegedly happened to Stacy and Patrick Ford and Jacob Lambert. Now, police arrested.
So if you followed my content for a little while, you know that I always say that there's the big 3 when it comes to motive: sex, drugs, and money. I want to add a 4th in situations like this. When you start hearing things about kids and on again, off again relationships, and anytime there's a divorce or separation, oftentimes custody also can be a big time motive as well. It's not as common as the other 3, but it's also a big time motive. I have a feeling that is most likely. I haven't watched the rest of this video. I watched part of it just to kind of understand the story, to know if it was something that I would want to react to. But I have a feeling that as more information comes out, that there's going to be something along those lines, either custody or she was going to lose custody. There was going to be a custody order. Maybe it was going to be 50-50, maybe because if she was planning on moving to Indiana, she was only going to be able to see them on weekends. He was going to fight for custody, something along those lines. So I would not be surprised if something like that were to come out. So let's continue and let's figure that part of it out.
Jenna at her home, and the Will County Sheriff says that she made incriminating statements. We don't know specifically what she said, but it seems like law enforcement is very confident they have the person who's responsible for these murders. It is unclear what a defense, though, may look like for her based off what she...
One other thing I want to add to the statement about custody that I mentioned. That's also one of the reasons why I believe that is that she didn't just kill him. She killed the parents as well. When there's a domestic dispute and they also kill or harm the parents as well, 9 times out of 10, there's a custody issue. I've seen and worked a lot of cases like this. Thankfully, none of my clients have been involved in a situation where it led to murder. However, dealt with 90% of the cases I dealt with were, I should say 100% of the cases were domestic violence, abuse, those sorts of things. And custody issues create a lot of drama. I would not be surprised in this situation if custody was the reason that led to the murder. But the reason why I mentioned the parents is that oftentimes the parents get involved, either through paying, they're paying for attorneys and paying for lawyers. They get involved by providing a place to stay and sometimes encouraging their son or daughter to take that person to court, convincing them to, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they can be toxic, but sometimes they might be just good, loving parents who are doing right by their children. So I've seen it on both ends where you have loving parents that are saying, hey, you need to stand up for yourself because the other person is abusive and they're taking advantage of you. And I've also seen where the grandparents are weaponizing children and grandchildren. So I don't know, what side of the fence that these folks might be on at the moment. However, I do suspect that this is a custody dispute that's gone awry, or at least the threat of a custody dispute. But I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that I'm right. Let's continue.
Allegedly did. The sheriff says that Struble will face 9 counts of first-degree murder in this case, and we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about how you can have so many counts of murder when there are 3 victims. Here are the charges listed in the Will County court records. Now, we don't know the relationship dynamic specifically between Jacob and Jenna. Police did describe them as having an on-again, off-again relationship, and of course, they shared children. Now, it did appear on social media that you go back to 2023, and they had what appeared to be an on relationship, or at least amicable when it came to raising their children. That's based off those birthday photos that we showed you at the top of this story. Now, it does appear that the couple also lived together at some point because of pictures they have of them bringing a newborn home. Now, it does not appear that criminal record or any sort of violent history. But again, now she's facing 9 counts of first-degree murder for what she allegedly did. We did a background search on her in Indiana court records, and we only found a traffic citation from 2018. And then when you search Illinois court records, you see those 9 counts of first-degree murder. Right now, Jenna's being held in the Lake County Jail in Indiana. And even though she only lived a short drive away from where these murders took place, since it is across state lines, she will have to be extradited to Illinois, where she will face charges that could put her away for the rest of her life. Now, she is the alleged face of evil in this story, a smiling mom who allegedly snapped and became a killer. But right now, the people who knew Stacy, Jacob, and Patrick, they are remembering people who they say brought a lot of good into this world. One friend writes that Jake held a special place in their heart because he understood how important family was. And they say he was an exceptional father who wanted his children to have strong family values and to know that they were loved beyond measure. Patrick, he was an avid golfer, actually worked at the local course, and he loved his family. He loved his grandkids, and he will be missed beyond description. And then Stacy was a director of finance for a graphic manufacturing company in Illinois. That company posted on Facebook that she was the backbone of their company for more than 20 years. Now, it's unclear when Jenna Struble will face a judge in Illinois and what the extradition process will look like for her. Joining us now to talk more about this case is Melba Pearson, civil rights and criminal law attorney, former prosecutor, and host of the Resident Legal Diva YouTube channel. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. It's really tough to make sense of this, of any cases of violence, but in this case, this woman facing, 9 counts of first-degree murder for the 3 victims here. I do want to just bring up CBS News Chicago has this line that is giving some context to the relationship, allegedly saying that deputies were also called to the home in January 2025 for domestic battery and a mental health intervention. Sheriff's officials said that Struble was involuntarily committed during that incident last year. So we can talk a bit about the mental health part of this, but when you see the 9 counts, and I know every state is different, but 9 counts of first degree murder, but we're dealing with 3 victims that, the lives that she allegedly took. What do you make of those types of charges and why there would be so many for 3 victims?
Yeah. So again, thank you for having me. And this is definitely a tragic case that reminds us that men can be victims of domestic violence too. A lot of times we focus on women being the survivors. And while, yes, there are a lot of women that are survivors, men can also be impacted, as we see in this horrible case. Now, in terms of the 3 victims, 9 counts, yes, it seems like the math doesn't math, right? But that is something that is a quirk in some states in their law, just in terms of, not only the 3 victims, but also looking at intent. Sometimes there's extra charges layered in just in case something goes wrong later on down the line in the process. And maybe as part of the negotiations, if there's eventually a plea, some of those counts may get dropped. Sometimes those counts are streamlined for the purposes of trial. So usually it's a strategic move on behalf of the prosecutor's office, why we see so many counts.
And there's going to be, she'll eventually be back in Illinois, and many states deal with this when you're talking about communities that are along a state line. But she, allegedly flees after this happens, and then she's arrested in St. John, Indiana, which is in the Chicagoland area, but just across the state line. So even though she's so close geographically, we still have to go through the extradition process the same way as if she was caught 200 miles away in another part of Indiana.
Absolutely. I'm based in South Florida. Many times we have defendants that will flee or people charged that will flee to Georgia. And we still, it's right across state lines, but we still have to extradite them back because, again, you're taking someone out of one state's custody and trying to bring them into your own custody. And so there's a legal process that has to be followed in terms of, we in the legal system refer to it as the body, but it's actually a person, right? A living person. But that's weird quirk again, but you have to file those motions in order to make sure the person is properly transported. And there's a record of how they got from point A to point B. And there's no allegations of they were kidnapped or anything like that. It's just to be very clear in terms of how the defendant person charged got from point A to point B.
And I know at the time we're recording this, to our understanding, she's still in Lake County, Indiana, and then will be brought to Will County, Illinois, where these murders took place that she is allegedly responsible for. When you see that there was, and in cases of domestic violence, sadly, I feel like there's a lot of times where there's a history. It's not the first time that something happened. And in this case, if this reporting is correct about January 2025 for a domestic battery and mental health intervention, typically, what does that mean for someone to be involuntarily committed if that's what happened to her?
So when you are involuntarily committed, and there's a couple different ways that it can happen. It could be a family member is basically calling a helpline saying, hey, my loved one is having a mental health episode. It could also be as a result of someone calling law enforcement, they coming and responding to the scene and seeing that someone's in an active mental health situation. And so at that point, the person is taken and transported to a mental health facility where they can get care, observation. Usually involuntary hospitalization would be about 24, 48 hours, somewhere in that range. This is not weeks or months or anything along those lines. It's just to make sure the person is stabilized, that they're no longer a danger to themselves or people around them. And it's to also could be the purposes of diagnosing the person, because maybe they're having a mental health break and they've never previously been diagnosed as bipolar or schizophrenic. Now it's like, oh, wait, now we can put a name to what's actually going on. And then it is up to the person to follow up on treatment moving forward.
And we don't know if she was diagnosed with anything. We don't know much about the relationship. I mean, you look at, I know police characterized it as on again, off again. It appears they have 2 kids.
So I want to talk about this whole on again, off again, and the fact that the host is saying that they don't know much about the relationship. This is a large part of the problem in domestic violence situations and toxic relationship situations. Is you hear people say all the time, from the outside looking in, everything looked great. And as a matter of fact, earlier in the show, they were talking about some pictures where it looked like they were amicable. I would not be surprised if you talk to people who are involved in that birthday party and in that picture and those sorts of things, and found out that they were in the biggest fight ever the night before, the day before. Some of the holiday pictures, it's very common for domestic violence situations to escalate during certain anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, big events, those sorts of things. And so that's the reason why I'm confident that something likely happened that same day that we're talking about, that they looked so amicable and everything looked so great. And the point I want to bring up is the fact that that no one knows what was going on behind the scenes, because the victim stayed silent, and the victim was trying to keep things under wraps. And this whole on again, off again thing, I mean, that people may have known that they were broken up or separated for certain points and those sorts of things, but they likely felt obligated, especially with children, to try to work things out. Maybe even felt guilty about breaking up or going through a divorce process where it was made to feel guilty. And this episode that they're talking about, that she was committed, what happens in situations like this where a relationship is on again, off again, quite often the one or both people, sometimes it can be both people, start to make threats of homicide. Obviously, that's something that actually happened in this situation. Homicide or suicide or both, right? I'm going to take myself out if you leave me. I'm going to take myself out if you ever take the kids away from me, those sorts of things. I'm going to come back and take out your whole family, which unfortunately happened in this situation. If you leave me, or if you take the kids away from me, or if I have to go even one night without my children, I'm going to, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And those type of situations can happen pretty frequently in domestic violence situations. And the victims of domestic violence will tell you that they feel obligated because that's the parent of their children, or because they still love that person, or for a lot of different reasons, right? They feel that they need to protect that person, like it's their responsibility to protect that person and take care of that person's mental health, instead of allowing for them to go to the go to the hospital, or to allow for administration to or therapists or psychiatrists to do their job, or to report it, or to allow for police to do their job. They feel like it's their responsibility to not only take care of it, but also to keep things silent, to not only because of the shame and the embarrassment that goes along with these type of events, but also I don't want to see my children's mother go through this. I don't want to see my children's father go through this. And what is this going to do to my children? What is this going to do to my family? What is this going to do to the opportunity for us to potentially reconcile if I actually tell people exactly what's going on? And so there's a lot of different layers and different dynamics that happen in situations like this. And also, if you are struggling in a situation like this, I do have information for you to work with a therapist, licensed therapist with BetterHelp. You'll get 15% off your first month of therapy. The reason why I bring a lot of this up is that people oftentimes tell people, go, just leave, not realizing that sometimes some people just leave, and then they start dealing with what's called post-separation abuse, that they left, they go through the divorce process, and then they find out that yeah, they're gone and they're in two different places, but the abuse and everything else has continued, and now they're weaponizing children. They're weaponizing that they're going to come by and hurt me or hurt my family or hurt themselves if I don't comply with them. And so it's a really big issue. And unfortunately, when domestic violence gets unreported or underreported, people genuinely don't know that anything is going on. But let's continue.
Just from social media, it appears like in 2023, they had a 2-year-old birthday party that looked, very nice, very typical. But, over the last couple of years, it's hard to know what the relationship was. When I looked her up, the only thing that comes up is a 2018 traffic citation in Indiana records. And then in Illinois, nothing came up other than, what she's dealing with now. Even in those cases, like in 2025, typically what type of record is there if there's a situation? I mean, would that be something where, something happens and maybe the family said, we don't want to press charges. But for there to be if this is what happened in 2025, some domestic battery incident, and then charges aren't filed, is there anything that goes into a record to kind of raise a red flag that there could be an issue here with this relationship?
Sadly, no. Many times there's a situation where, because we would normally see an arrest, right?
Yeah.
Depending when we, and there are a few different ways that can happen. But when you usually pull somebody's criminal history and there's been an arrest, even if charges are dropped later on down the line, there is still some record of an arrest. So what likely may have happened here, again, not knowing the full picture and just based on the information that's available, there may have been prior domestic violence incidents, but the family or the victim never reported, never told anyone in a law enforcement capacity. Now, this is all going to come to bear during trial, if this case does go to trial, because there are usually pathways in terms of, prior bad acts or prior evidence that could come in at trial if there has been other domestic violence incidences between the two of them that may have been witnessed by a family member or a friend, or maybe the victim went to work and said, oh my gosh, my ex is driving me crazy. She went and slashed my tires or something like that, right? So there may be some.
So some of the things that are very common in situations like this is for the person to call that person's job, to harass them at work, to harass them while they're out with friends. So other people definitely know. Now, the victim in this situation may not have actually said anything, right? Now, two different things. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of people with the police don't know because it's been unreported or underreported. And oftentimes the victim doesn't want to say anything because of everything they said, everything I said, because of the shame, everything that happens with it, with being in a domestic violence, especially if the victim is a man. But the reality of it is that as much as they try to cover, there's other people that know. They can tell that your demeanor has changed. They can tell by the phone calls. I've worked with at companies and with people who were who I could tell was struggling, or I knew that was struggling. And if they left them the night before, all of a sudden, because if you think about it, one of the things that people have to understand about domestic violence is that they're being abusive for control. They're not being abusive so you can leave. They're being abusive so you can stay, right? So if they're being abusive so you can stay and so they can continue to have control over you, what ends up happening is that if and when you do leave, or if you, even when I say leave, it doesn't always have to be like a separation or a divorce. It could be leave to go to a friend's house. It could be leave to just to get away from an argument. But eventually you do have to go to work. Eventually you do have to go to school. And so people who are perpetrators of domestic violence know these things, right? They know your schedule. They know that you're going to be at church on Sunday, or they know that you're going to be at work every day from 9 to 5. And so those are their opportunities to begin to harass you, to be able to start driving by, to those sorts of things. So there are other people that know. Whether, the victim, the family may not have known that other people know, but they've witnessed, these incidences. And as much as they try to keep it quiet, most likely other people do.
other evidence of prior violence. It's just outside of the criminal justice system.
And when it comes to, we don't know specifically, I think at this point, like, other than clearly they had an on again, off again relationship. They maybe looked up that there was this call in 2025, and it seemed pretty quickly they had Jenna Struble in custody for the murders of these people. They say that she made some incriminating statements. We don't know what those are. And then they also allegedly have the murder weapon, a gun that was used in this triple homicide. The fact that there may be some mental health issues here, like if you're a defense attorney taking over this case, I know we have a long way to go. How can that come into play if you're a defense attorney looking at, oh no, my client made these statements to police, presumably after she was read her rights?
Right. Well, first of all, point A, were her rights read? Was this in response to interrogation or questions being presented by law enforcement? Or was it what we'd call a spontaneous statement where the cops come and is like, yeah, you know what? He pissed me off. And so I did X, Y, Z. Right. And at that point, those statements are admissible. So it's kind of difficult as a defense attorney to attack that. Now, the next thing you can say is that, well, because of her mental health concerns, she hasn't been on her medication. And so she reacted in this way. But it becomes a difficult pathway because we're not looking necessarily at insanity, which is something very different than having mental health concerns. You can be mentally ill and have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. But if you're on your medicine, you know who all the parties are in the courtroom, you know who the judge is, you can recognize, okay, this is the judge, this is my defense attorney, that's the prosecutor. You have to be able to meaningfully participate in your defense.
So she brought up a point that I definitely wanted to talk about. I would say that it is highly, highly likely that she is struggling with a mental illness. And specifically, and I don't want to, for everyone who's listening, I don't want to stigmatize any of these illnesses that I'm naming. People who have these illnesses have and can live very, very productive lives. But just based on some of the surface level things that I'm hearing, borderline personality disorder or somewhere else on the cluster B spectrum, but I would say borderline personality disorder. We could be looking at bipolar. I'm not hearing anything. I think we would have heard by now, just even in these type of interviews, if she was hearing voices or something along those lines for schizophrenia. So I would say somewhere in the mood disorder, bipolar, depression, postpartum is another one that could lead to something like this, postpartum depression. I'm not sure. I know she had pictures of young children. I'm not sure how old they are now or anything like that. But postpartum can last a lot longer than what people typically think. But I would say that it's somewhere in those range, or kind of a mix of all those. Now, it will also remain to be seen whether these are diagnosed, whether these are undiagnosed, or whether these were diagnosed and she's not doing treatment. She's diagnosed and she is doing treatment. She was prescribed medication, and whether or not she was or wasn't taking them, those things will come into play. Now, mental illness is not an excuse for abuse. It's not an excuse for anything like this that's happened. And there's a big difference between struggling with mental health and being eligible for an insanity plea. So I would be interested to see if if they try to get her off by reason of insanity, but I think that would be a really tall hurdle to get over, given a lot of the circumstances. But let's continue.
So if the defense counsel asks, hey, do you want to take a plea? This is the pros and cons. You have to be able to follow along and have a basic understanding versus, if you're completely out there, and just not able to talk, you're seeing, stars, whatever the case may be. And I'm not trying to make light of it, but I'm just, again, real world. folks can be completely having a mental health breakdown. Well, that's someone who can't meaningfully participate in their defense, and they also can't appreciate the seriousness of the charges. So we're not quite sure if that's the issue there. If it is, that's a whole different pathway. And again, is she competent to go to trial, et cetera? So that's a whole different pathway that defense counsel would have to approach. But her just having mental health concerns, that alone may not be enough to help her at trial. It could be something used as part of the plea bargaining process. Like, listen, my client has mental health issues. As a result of that, is there a way we can do something different with the sentence, get her the help she needs, et cetera?
Because even if, this, and we don't know what this relationship was like, it was on again, off again. You had this domestic battery call in 2025 reportedly, but like, even if it was an extremely toxic relationship, even if there's not arrest or anything, but like, if that's presented in court that this was a toxic relationship, like, it's still triple murder, and it's still like, this is an awful crime if she actually committed this. Like, how much does that history actually matter if we get into a courtroom here where it comes to, listen, we have the gun and we have the statements that in this moment, on that night, 2:00 in the morning or whenever it was, you did this. Like, does the history even matter?
To me, I think it does, because number one, it explains to the jury what this is all about. Juries, even though in depending on the charge, of course, this being first degree murder, motive is an issue, premeditation is an issue, but in not all charges or all cases does the prosecution have to prove a motive. A lot of times it's nice to have, but there's no legal requirement in most cases to prove a motive. Intent, yes, but why someone did it, not necessarily. But juries like to know why. And it's always easier for me when I was a prosecutor handling cases. I like to be able to explain, this is why this crime happened. Sometimes you get up and say, this is a senseless crime. We don't know why. Not the best, but you can still get a conviction that way.
So senseless, like what she's talking about, that might lean a little bit more towards mental health. That would explain it for a jury. And we've seen, and I think that this is going to be a big hurdle for the defense when they start talking about when they try to overcome something like this, that she didn't do it or there was no motive. If they are able to attach any sort of mental health or mental illness to this, especially if she was diagnosed, especially if she'd been talked to about it and she wasn't taking her medication and things like that, or she wasn't doing the things that she was prescribed to do, then that now becomes I wouldn't say a motive, but like a reason why, right? A reason why would be that she already has violent tendencies, in particular when she's not taking her medication, and in particular when she's not doing what requires for her to have good mental health. And this led to this tragic event. The other side of this, I think it's this whole on again, off again. If there is a paper trail of the boyfriend, husband, I believe his name is Jacob. I forgot his name, so I apologize. If he, like I mentioned before at the beginning of the show, if he were applying for custody, if he said that, no, this is officially over, if there are signs that he made moves to make this on again, off again relationship officially off, then that is a big, big motive. Now, I can tell you from my own professional experience that someone leaving a partner in these type of situations, just ending it, can be motive. People dating other people, if she found out that he not only moved on but started seeing someone else, again, that falls under the whole sex. Remember the big three: sex, drugs, and money. That also could be a motive. And then the other one that we mentioned early in the show, custody. That not only was he leaving, but that the motive could be, if I take him out, then I have the kids all to myself, and I don't have to worry about competing. I don't have to worry about sharing. I don't have to worry about any of those things. And I just move on with my life. But let's continue.
But it's much easier when you're able to be like, listen, these two were in a relationship. He decided he no longer wanted to be with her. Every time he tried to leave her, she would get abusive. She would ratchet up the pressure, etc. And the jury can very easily follow along. So it makes the process easier from a prosecution standpoint and easier for the jury to understand the totality of the circumstances.
Hi, this is Sona with Kelly's Heating and Air.
And right now we only have the statement that the Will County Sheriff's Office put out there. We don't know the specific narratives that'll come out in court documents about just what happened. We know that Jake Lambert, he was found shot dead in a car. And then you have his parents, the Fords, they were found dead on the first floor of the home. When you think about a defense and you're accused of multiple murders like she is in this case, like, can you separate all of them of like something happened in the car and then something happened in the front of the house? Because I think for the prosecutors, it's like, even if there was a self-defense argument in the car, how did the two people in the house end up being shot as well?
Exactly. And again, it depends on the full narrative that the prosecution will have at the time of trial. Because again, there could be a ring camera from across the way that may have captured some critical information. The officer's body cam, there might be something there in terms of, maybe she said something off the cuff that could be usable. So it all depends. No matter what, this is something that if I was prosecuting the case, I'm approaching it as one continuous episode, that it started in the car and it could have been the family of one of the parents came out because they heard a disturbance. And then now she's thinking, oh no, I've got witnesses. Mm-hmm. I've got to take them out because they're going to be able to say that, my ex and I had problems in the past. So, I'm going to look at it as one episode, not two separate incidents.
Yeah. And I know I'm really getting ahead of myself. I mean, she hasn't even been sent back to Illinois, and a trial could be a long, long way away, seeing how this goes.
If at all.
The fact that she allegedly fled, they end up arresting her 15 minutes away in St. John, Indiana. How does that impact a defense potentially? Because if you're a prosecutor, you could say this is a person who not just allegedly did this, but these were people who are now in help because they were injured after being shot and she ran away. Like, how does the fleeing part of it factor into the story that the prosecution's going to tell?
So from a prosecution standpoint, you're going to say consciousness of guilt, that she fled because she knew she did something wrong. She wasn't trying to stick around and face the consequences. She headed out. Now, defense will argue something like, well, maybe she lived in the area and she was fleeing. She was going back to her house, or she was going to a friend's house. Not, if she was really trying to flee, she wouldn't have gone one state over. She would have come to Florida. She would have gone to New York, whatever the case may be. You could also argue, that's where you might argue mental health, that, she was so confused and everything else, and that's why she had to flee the scene. Again, that's not saying that these are going to be winning arguments. And the Constitution does not guarantee you a winning argument. It just simply requires that you have a defense. So that could be some of the aspects that the defense could travel on.
And just lastly, and this is another question that's really getting ahead of myself, but, looking at the state line issue where this happens in Illinois, there's no death penalty in Illinois. Indiana has the death penalty. When it comes to like plea negotiations in a case like this, if prosecutors feel like they have a very strong case against this person, like what leverage do you have to potentially get someone to accept a plea deal if the death penalty is already off the table? Because I could see in Indiana where, that's leverage where a defense attorney might tell their client, hey, we can get you life in prison without parole or something like that. Like, what leverage in a non-death penalty state like Illinois would a prosecutor potentially have in trying to get someone to take a plea?
Listen, the thought of life in prison, most people that does not seem very appetizing, right?
No,
so
not much.
So and with a firearm being used, there would be usually there's a 25-year min-man to life in terms of that. So maybe the play would be, if I was defense counsel, I'd be like, listen, let's see if we can get the 25-year min-man. Because then there's the chance that you may be able to get out, period. But secondly, you may be able to get out and be a part of your children's life. Now, again, that's a whole separate discussion because my heart just breaks for the two kids who've lost their dad, lost their grandparents in one fell swoop, and now you've lost your mom because she's in the system and she's not coming back. And so who's going to raise these children, all of that? I mean, just heartbreaking. So, but again, there could be an argument if she was a decent mom. Again, yes, I know you killed the father. That's not exactly a decent mom, but on a day-to-day, interactions, she makes sure the kids ate, they went to school, all of that. The defense could use that as an argument to say, listen, she was active in her children's life. She wants the opportunity to be able to do that again. She accepts responsibility for what she did. And so may we have the 25-year midman. Again, with 3 people, that's iffy.
Yeah.
But you ask.
Yeah. And it's just, and I'm happy you brought up, because I think just there's a lot of heartbreak in this story, and you can see a lot of people, especially the Fords, just the amount of people in the community, who search their name on Facebook, all 3, the victims in this case, and Jake Lambert, and how beloved they were in the community. And then there's just a lot of questions, and these kids, now going through this because of what allegedly happened in the middle of the night on Monday.
All right. Thank you very much for watching. That's all I got for you today. Also, be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification button so you're notified every time I upload a new video. With all that being said, thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. You guys have a good one.